it out into the marketplace. So what are some lessons learned and what are we going to talk about today? First of all, we've got to define a little bit what is success. What are we all trying to accomplish, both for ARPA-E and for you all? Because if we don't know what we're talking about, we can't possibly get there. And then what are some of the activities that we ask you all to work on? One of the things ARPA-E is actually tasked with is spending 5% of our project funds on this tech transfer and outreach activities, tech-to-market activities. And we often ask things like techno-economic modeling and building out value propositions, building the team that's around your commercialization prospect, and what are some lessons learned in that area? And then where we wound up getting some next steps. One of the things I'm going to be very, very careful about in this is in sharing sort of lessons learned overall, but not sharing specific competitive secrets. Obviously, ARPA-E winds up funding projects in areas where there is potential commercial success out there, and a number of the teams we're very excited to work with are trying to reap that success. So we're very careful not to give any of the details on some of the stuff. So with that in mind, so what's success for ARPA-E and where's our history? You go back, whatever that is, 7 years ago, the National Academy said, set up a DARPA-like agency in energy, went through the process of getting authorized and then getting appropriation in 2009, and in April of 2009, ARPA-E sprung into existence. Big transition for ARPA-E was getting the point from that first ARA funds and sort of justifying that our mission is one that is worthwhile doing and continuing to be done through the Department of Energy. So in fiscal year 2011, we wound up getting into the budget and have had a growth path since that point, and growing as an agency. So it's got that kind of that startup feel. One of the key things in that authorizing legislation says that ARPA-E Program Directors, that's the position I have, are term limited essentially. So I came into ARPA-E saying my last day that I'm in the office hopefully is September 30th of 2013. So I am coming to the very end of my time here. We're in the middle of handing things off, and actually my position as a program director changed in early August as well. So this is really kind of a great opportunity for me to look back at some of the things that we've worked on. So very quickly, what's ARPA-E trying to do? It's develop new technologies. It's a technology funding agency, of course, and applying that technology to reduce energy imports, improve the efficiency with which we use our energy resources, and also reduce the impact on the environment of the energy that we wind up using. And this really is an economic, competitiveness opportunity where we're solving that problem at a very early stage, in some cases very fundamental research challenges that need to be overcome. But in overcoming those, we wind up having this big impact. So how do we look at that? We look at it in terms of transformational technologies. I'm certain many of you have seen this curve before. An existing learning curve, that would be something like transportation. Looking at it historically, you had the horse and buggy. You had a number of new technologies that people were trying to develop and saying, hey, if we can just figure out how to use these new fuels, internal combustion engines, we can wind up getting out into the marketplace with them. And ultimately, one winds up learning, and that would be getting out and demonstrating it and scaling that technology as a new learning curve, and that's the internal combustion engine and the rise of the automotive industry, right? So what we're trying to do is figure out, how do we not make faster horses? How do we completely disrupt the technology? So that's ARPA-E's goal. Where ARPA-E plays is in that upper left-hand corner. So at the end of an ARPA-E project, by most measures, if you look at this, the cost performance curve, you are higher cost per performance than the incumbent technology. So what do you do now? How do we get that out to market, and how do we get across that valley of death into things that are potentially useful? So this gets back to the basics of an ARPA-E project. We want to have high impact out there. You want to have impact on the mission areas. You want to have transformational technologies. It's challenging what the status quo is. It's rethinking how you solve an existing problem out there, and in doing so, saying where are the technical gaps. We're building that bridge. So this is what this talk today is a lot about, is how do we do that translation from technical advance to economic impact and deployment into society. And it's, of course, people that wind up doing that. So finding great people that are willing to really be dedicated to this problem and helping them with the tools that they need to succeed and reach their goals. So if you go back into the history of DARPA, this is a picture of George Hallmeyer. He was the head of DARPA in the 1970s, and he came up with a set of questions that DARPA to this day winds up using. And if you go into the Gathering Storm report, we use the same questions internally. And they're very simple questions on identifying a technology program, which are things like, what are you trying to do, and explain it in common language, how's it done today, and what's new, and who will care, and how will it be measured, right? So these are mainly technical questions, although it does have questions about cost and time, right? What's interesting, after he left DARPA, Hallmeyer wound up taking a job as Chief Technical Officer at Texas Instruments. And he wound up developing a number of questions. We're going to get to that in just a second. When I look at an ARPA-E project, there are really three successes based on those, or three outcomes you can get on that Hallmeyer catechism. Success number one is the one we all think about. We took on a hard research challenge. We had a number of measurable and objective challenges. These are milestones. We've met those milestones. And in meeting those milestones, we showed that the research works, that this approach has the potential to solve the underlying problem we're trying to solve. So it's saying if we wind up finding a new catalyst, that as a result of that new catalyst, we can wind up then applying it into battery technology, so it drives down the cost of energy storage, so that then you can use it to balance the grid. That's success. Now, have we got the whole thing together at the end of the project? No, but what we've done is we've knocked down that first scientific and technical challenge. Another outcome that's a really positive outcome is when you get a definitive no. And actually, ARPA-E likes definitive no's, which is to say, we had a set of milestones, we worked really hard, we realized that they are unachievable milestones, but they are the milestones that matter relevant to the application. What this says is the technical approach we're trying to use will never work. Going back to our original model of beating horses for transportation, steam engines were an idea people were trying to use. Ultimately, it was internal combustion engines. So what you want to do is fail fast on those other technical approaches. Publish it, get it in the public domain so people don't continue funding the same approach, because that's a challenge. You want to make sure people aren't refunding the same idea, and then move on. A terrible outcome is when you try and take on one of these hard applied research challenges. At the end of a set of milestones, you wind up not knowing the answer. You don't know if the milestones are even met. Are they incremental? Is the team dysfunctional? There's a bunch of reasons. These are execution failures. So to me, that's the real outcome that is a failed outcome from our ARPA-E project. So assuming you get to the top two here, what Hallmeyer had when he was at Texas Instrument was a 7-step, no excuses technology transfer policy. And I found this looking back through, there's an IEEE Spectrum biography of him back in 1994. And it's very straightforward things that reflects what ARPA-E is really does as well. So first question is, you allocate your capital and your people very early in the research process that you need to wind up building for success. So building a team. You also really early on bring in potential users of the technology. This we view as customers, but it's not always customers. It's people who then integrate that technology into their products. So it's, again, building a community around it, but what you're really doing is validating the value proposition behind that technology. Use common equipment in the development lab. Make it easy, so if you're a success, you're able to then economically wind up getting that technology out. So this is really building out that techno-economic connection. And then a couple of things in your research plan, you're actually proving out the techno-economic model. You've got a bunch of things you don't know going into the research problem. It's research. Part of the research is to buy down this technical risk, to say if you're successful, we'll know it works, and we ultimately will know it scales. So some of these no excuse tech transfer policy questions will relate more to if your first research is successful, we know it works, but we don't know it scales. So how do you start solving and identifying those problems? And it's really as we're discovering over and over and over again, or we're kind of rediscovering here, is that you really have to closely link that research and technology community with the ultimate product development and pilot production community out there. So what are some activities beyond the technical research we've done? And this techno-economic modeling is something that our tech-to-market team comes to over and over again. And I've found it's very, very important actually in the technology side of it. But at the same time, a number of teams look at you and go, what do you mean when you say a techno-economic model? So what a techno-economic model does is it's actually a systems-level technical analysis of the technology you're developing, put in terms of money, right? So it connects that technology advances. So let's say you're building a system, it's got a number of critical dimensions or critical reaction steps in a series. How does improving each of those steps wind up affecting the ultimate cost? So it's not just a cost model, and it's certainly not a business plan, but it's really tying your technical advantages into the language of what will it cost to do this technology and have it applied in its application. A key thing I've found is this is something not to be outsourced. So on a number of projects, we've had PIs that have said, you know, I've got a buddy over in the business school, I'm going to bring him in, he'll write this up, we'll be all set. What inevitably winds up happening is the principal investigators don't really understand that linkage between the technical advances and that ultimate impact. And as a result, they continue to innovate in areas and sometimes go down dead-end paths that don't even matter, right? So you want to make sure that you're focused on what's the key technical risk that you're trying to buy down as quickly as possible. So this is really a challenging interdisciplinary problem. Often it's the thing that our principal investigators, you're all very accomplished people in your own disciplines, and it pushes you out of your comfort zone. And we see that, and it's really important. We're building a community that's comfortable with this. And in doing that, we're going to wind up accelerating innovation in the long run. So that's good. The other key point is there's a lot of technical uncertainty and financial uncertainty. You know, if you go back to ARPA-E's original mission, it says to invest in technologies where technology uncertainty is limiting private sector investment. That in solving those things, private sector or other government agencies will move forward with it. So that means this techno-economic model, if it was completely certain on day one of your project, there would be no reason to do your project. Right? The research is increasing fidelity and increasing knowledge about that techno-economic model throughout. And so that what we're doing is really making sure that the milestones we're accomplishing are really matter and wind up solving those problems that wind up getting you a community around you so you can move your technology forward. So I'll give you a key example here. So we run the energy storage program. And we came out, a key metric is capital expenditures. And in our metric, we wound up saying there's a current price, and in that CapEx for storage, there's a dollars per kilowatt hour. And we set out there a $100 kilowatt hour target. And the reason we put that out there is we did a system level analysis, not of storage, but really looked at what's the problem we were trying to solve, which was, in that case, it was ramping of renewable energy. And said, if you look at all the other approaches, whether it's using cheap natural gas and building new generators or using the existing transmission network better, if we ultimately want this to scale without subsidies, you need to get down to that price. Now, are you going to get down to that price in 3 years or that cost in 3 years? Probably not. I mean, miracles do happen, but my guess is not. So what we wanted to say is, do you have a credible pathway, and are we thinking about new learning curves that will get you to that point? Now, you break the system cost down into kind of two components. You've got the energy-related components that just come in dollars per kilowatt hour. This would be things like, you know, your electrolytes or your analyte catholytes that you store the electrical energy, electrical charge in. You have the power-related components, which is to say the elements that are where your chemical reaction is. And so what that reaction rates are, they're typically kinetically limited. You divide that by the duration, you wind up amortizing that as a dollars per kilowatt hour as well for your system. So we put together on that program first level techno-economic studies, look at things like what's the new electrolyte compositions and concentrations. And in those areas, you take the first order estimate, what will it wind up costing? Okay? We wind up, throughout the research, it winds up changing every quarter, every 2 quarters, update it, revisit that techno-economic model and say, have we learned new things? Because in one project in particular, in the power-related areas, typically you have a series of steps. You've got a reaction rate and a mass transfer rate and a resistance rate. In one project, after the first quarter, the principal investigator came back and said, you know, we've done a much more detailed system-level trade study. Turns out the catalytic reaction rates on the surfaces of the system we're looking at are fast enough that we're limited more by mass transfer and resistance. What I'd rather do is actually change the milestones to reallocate resources into those problems that are actually the relevant problems. That's a wonderful benefit of a techno-economic model, because what it did is it drove what's the research challenge that matters if you're going to try and get a technology out there. Instead of saying, hey, I've got a core expertise in this scientific area, how do I push it out? So that's really a huge portion of why I think techno-economic modeling is important. Now in a program, we're going to only get partly way there. The other thing to know is, are we bottoming out at that price point? Can we ultimately get to $100 a kilowatt hour, or will we have a pathway forward from that point? So it's important to continue to revisit throughout your program where that cost point is. Okay, so just to give you an idea, within the GRIDS program, took the the EPRI studies of, instead of dollars per kilowatt hour and dollars per watt hour and dollars per watt, we flip that over. Simple trick of a reciprocal. So instead of going to the lower left corner, you're going to the upper right corner. What this really is an economic Rigoni plot. And if you look at the advances we've gotten and you plot that into, if we were able to scale up some of those things in terms of things like current densities and life cycles and things like that, what we find is that, we haven't made it all the way to the economic target, but we've got a good first start. I'm really excited about it. You start seeing 2 and 3 and 4x improvements in critical tolerancing or critical dimensions that matter, or reaction rates. That's really important. Or completely new chemistries that wind up giving you a new pathway forward. So with that, that's where we're really kind of excited of measuring the overall shifts in that direction on a portfolio basis. Okay, what are some lessons learned? Getting that first digit close in a techno-economic analysis is a real challenge. If you're off by a factor of 2, you want to revise it, but you probably are off by a factor of 2. So if you come with 5 significant digits, probably not going to trust that you know what you're doing, right? So this is the challenge. It's also okay at the start of a program to say there are these things we don't know. You want to know what you don't know at the start. That's really important. That drives what the research challenges are to solve that. And as I said, techno-economic models can actually guide the plan of work and the changes that we make throughout. It also can be really important in terms of giving bad news to teams. There's one project in particular where at the end of the system-level techno-economic modeling, they said, and even if we're successful in our project, we're so far away from where we need to be that this complete approach is probably not the best approach to use, and we should try a different direction. And it actually pivoted the whole organization. Now, you might look at that as bad news from your research perspective as a research team, or you could look at it as good news to say, hey, we failed fast, we've got good core competency, let's find the next thing to do, okay? The other thing is to say, don't argue about what the targets are in doing that techno-economic analysis. Discuss it, don't argue. The FOA targets are typically there for a reason for ARPA-E. We've got some mission-related problem we're trying to solve. Willing to talk about it, and we're not stupid. We know that there are first markets along the way to that goal. Certainly in the area of energy storage, there are a lot of applications where you can monetize storage well before you wind up getting to that $100 a kilowatt hour goal. And we actually would encourage you to do that. But the programmatic goal we're trying to get to is that long-term goal. So on the grid's case, for instance, what we're trying to do is balance reserves on the U.S. grids for high renewable penetration areas, and wind up doing that so it's economically competitive with what you do for pumped hydroelectric. Well, pumped hydroelectric is incredibly cheap. It's orders of magnitude cheaper than almost any other storage technology out there, right? So you wind up needing to drive that cost down, or you're just not going to be able to deploy it. However, there are a number of places where you can use that technology first. So in the lower left corner is the applications we're looking at. That's the lower 48 U.S. grid, where electricity, frankly, is a great commodity and reliable and a pretty good system. We just want to make it better. Well, you could look at things like remote areas of the United States where you don't have an interconnected grid. Alaska and Hawaii come to mind right away. So it's a really important value proposition to have storage in those cases. In the developing world, the Department of Defense, anywhere where you're getting your primary electricity from diesel fuel that you're transporting a long distance, whether it's in the DoD environment or you're looking at in the developing world, that's a huge opportunity for developing your technology and deploying your technology as you come down that learning curve. So the other sort of theme we go after in ARPA-E is, where are your first markets? Let's identify those first markets. So a key thing and a key education for our teams is, what's the difference between a technology, a product, and a market? And there are some very sophisticated people looking at this and understanding of it on ARPA-E teams. There are also people that this is the first time they've ever looked at it. So I like to think of it as the TPM model, the technology product linkage, market linkage. So technologies provide you with differentiated capabilities, but the end users don't buy a technology. They actually buy a product in which that technology is embedded that satisfies some enduring market need that they have as a customer. Right? So it's at that intersection between those where you're looking at and you're saying, hey, how do we take this technology, how do we embed it in a product so you've got those product attributes that are enabled by a technology capability? And in the long run, we're looking for our FOA goal, but there might be some early market where you can take that same technology and product and wind up deploying it in an earlier market as well. So this is just another representation of that says you've got technical capabilities. That's what researchers are great at. We've got customer needs out there. What's the Venn diagram? So how do you find that out? You talk to a lot of people. Talk to them over and over and over again. And it's a real important thing in talking to people about this. What immediately often research groups would wind up doing is they say, well, I'm going to go get a market study done, and then I can see a market study on where the products are. And that's useful. It's the equivalent of saying, I'm interested in this scientific problem. I'm going to go attend a scientific conference on it and see it. But where you really find out that differentiated capability is when you do the primary market research yourself. You get on the phone and you talk to potential customers and you say, what's the problem you have? How do we solve it? And then you plot that into what your technical capabilities are. So it may be something where they've got a cost problem or they've got a reliability problem. But it's really important to bring that in early into your process, because that can help you in guiding your technical capabilities you're trying to expand upon. It's a really cyclic process also. Open to change, you know? You've got to be open to change. You've got to listen as you're out there doing it. And in doing that, you wind up developing your value proposition. So what a value proposition is that simple statement that links what you're doing technically with what the customer needs. So I've got a very formulaic approach to this that my colleagues and I use in teaching students, that we just lay it out in 2 sentences, which says, in the first sentence, it's for whoever the customer is who have a problem. The name for the product is a product that does XYZ and has a certain set of benefits. And then you say, unlike the competing technology, or the competing approach, the product has this differentiated capabilities. So you can get it down to 2 sentences. So I'm going to give you just a made-up example here, essentially. And the numbers aren't even right on this, is my guess. They're a complete guess at it. But saying, so for mobile phone system operators in emerging economies who support 900,000 mobile towers with electricity using diesel generators, the super new chemistry battery provides storage for increased uptime from 60% to 99%, while reducing fuel costs by 40%. Unlike existing approaches of storing excess fuel on site and building redundant generators, or the use of lead-acid batteries, which are subject to theft, the super new chemistry battery reduces capital expenses by 70%, while inherently being theft and tamper-proof. Okay? So if you can get that down to that 2 sentences, this is what people refer to as their elevator pitch. And you've come down a long way saying, here's what we do, here's why we do it, and how we wind up doing it. Okay? Oops, sorry, going the wrong way. So a couple quick comments on this. A cool technology, and a statement about a cool technology is not a value proposition. You can't say, our value proposition is this new electric motor. That's not a value proposition. It's our ability at a certain weight and a certain cost to wind up connecting electricity to torque. Okay? A motivated market is also not a value proposition. You can't say that people are just dying for these new battery technologies out there, so that's our value, is satisfying people, being really excited about it. Also, our FOA targets are not a value proposition. They are market data you can use in developing it, but I wouldn't rely on those as a value proposition alone. But what you're doing is you're really connecting that technical capability and the market opportunity in that so what statement. What you need to do as far as research, and this is primary research, is validating that value proposition through your tech-to-market effort. Okay. It's also important to realize there are complementary technologies out there. So you might need not only your technology, but the technologies that are being developed in 2 or 3 different places and bringing that together. This is a so-called open innovation model. You can even look at it more complexly than that, saying you've got competing technologies trying to satisfy the same thing, and you've got complementing technologies. So this is Andy Grove's complementarity and competition framework. It's similar to what's called a Porter diagram. But that you've got complementing technologies out there that says, I'm developing this new battery chemistry, but we also need power electronics. I'm not a power electronics researcher, but we've got those things going forward. How do we bring it all together to make an even better product out there? Another observation, looking at my time at ARPA-E, is for existing firms, especially large firms that typically have business processes in place, things like cost models, new product definition processes, stage gating. It's best when we wind up sort of having our milestones reflect the stuff that you need to do anyway, because what you're ultimately doing is communicating to your management and all of your stakeholders exactly how this technology will wind up getting out of your laboratory and ultimately being something your organization wants to invest in and get to market. So that's also a really important dialogue and interplay, and it's organization by organization. Each one of them has their own set of business processes, but how do we map that on there is an important role. So just to show you about complementing technology, this is a typical battery management system. And even within ARPA-E, we have a number of places where we're developing technologies. We've got the grid scale storage program, we've got transportation storage batteries, we've got for long range and high energy density, we have thermal storage programs, we've got our open FOA, we've got our controls program, and we also have our power electronics program. And in all of these, we can actually develop a superior technical product in the end by innovating around that technology. So focus on your technical innovation where you can, and then team up with people where you need to. Teaming is important. So this is a picture of Nikola Tesla. Nikola Tesla is a hero to many, many scientists, especially in the electrical field. And they feel that he was done a disservice. However, almost everyone that winds up getting viewed as a martyr to technology, it's often because they went alone. It's this, I can build a better mousetrap, I can make superior technology, and that's all that will matter. And the lesson that's learned here is you need to build a team around yourself. I'll give you a few examples. So this is Thomas Edison in his laboratory at Menlo Park. He had hundreds of people working in his laboratory. Never have you seen a picture of those hundreds of people. If you worked on that team and you were a young rock star working on that team, how long would you want to stay there? Right? You'd want to go out and start up your own company. That's the risk Edison had. Right? So you need to build a team. Coming a little bit sooner, this is on the invention of the transition. William Shockley, Bardeen, and Brattain at Bell Labs famously won a Nobel Prize together. That is the only place you will wind up seeing something published with all three names on it. You won't find an article out there with all three of them as co-authors on it. Famously a dysfunctional team, and in fact, very, very quickly, people wound up leaving afterwards. Right? Shockley wound up going out to Silicon Valley, hiring a bunch of people, wound up working on them, working for Shockley Semiconductor. It's the formation of Silicon Valley. Actually, the formation of Silicon Valley is when the 8 of them decided, you know, enough is enough, we need to work as a team together. Right? That's Bob Noyce right in the middle, and this is the ethos that built up around Silicon Valley. You know, I love the office furniture that they have in this picture. So this is the team that founded Fairchild Semiconductor that then wound up founding just about every other semiconductor firm. You can wind up branching back to this group of 8 people. So it's really important to build a team, and that ethos continues on to this day. I also love this early picture of the Google team all working together, and you can tell it's a team. You're not going to be able to do this alone, especially in this day and age. Time is your biggest enemy. It's not the ability to gather fame around the greatness of your science and technology, right? If you want to lead a translational effort and you're a scientist, you've got to ask yourself a number of questions. First of all, what's your goals? And you really have to know yourself. Where do you need to build yourself up? Got one entrepreneur I've worked with that's done a marvelous job watching him evolve from being the scientist to being actually a business leader. Did it with a lot of intentionality on it. In fact, wound up doing things like going out and finding his own business mentors on this. Really needed to find people to surround with yourself that are not complimenters like say nice things about you, but complement your skill sets. Make sure that everyone at the table, you wind up when you walk away from your team, you've got all the answers from it, but you don't necessarily know it all yourself, right? You want to get that best result that winds up coming out of your team. You have to know who you trust. Who do you want to give you bad news? We often see this in program reviews where ARPA-E program managers are giving bad news. Did you like that? You probably didn't, right? But your program manager is actually your best friend at this. Because we really want to see your success and would rather wind up working with you and say, here's a problem. Let's address that problem. Let's work together. Big thing also with scientists, you don't need to be the inventor of everything. You need to give the team around you the opportunity for buy-in and to grow themselves. So if you look at the sort of experience base of successful entrepreneurs, successful entrepreneurs are not necessarily people that are wide open risk takers. It tracks very closely with being open to new ideas and being very conscientious and intellectually honest. That is, you want to really be in control of your own destiny, and you want to check off that to-do list every day and get it all done. And that's the kind of people that wind up becoming very, very successful as entrepreneurs. Okay, after ARPA-E, what are some next steps? So my research is done now what, which is, program directors essentially get this asked often. And what people are really asking is, can you extend my grant another 36 months? That's probably not the right answer for ARPA-E. And certainly if you're asking that question in month 36, you're 35 months late in asking it. There are things that you wind up saying, hey, let's take this to the next level. but it's because you've asked the really relevant questions as you went along, as we've talked about. You've connected the technology to the market. You've wound up building a team out. You wind up finding that you've got a key gap. We can wind up solving that technical gap together. If it's just a matter of saying, hey, I'm running out of funding, that's not the direction we want to go. So if we look at a decision loop, though, at the end of that 36 months, we go on the ongoing process. If you're doing a technology research project, we're reviewing it together. So that's the loop at the very top there. And at the end of 36 months, you say, is this ready to go forward or not? You have to be very, very honest with yourself at that point. If it will never be ready, you publish and you fail fast. That's important to do. Life's too short not to. If it's not ready, why is it not ready? Okay, it might need additional complementary development. It might need to be developed at a different TRL level. That could be even earlier stage. You may have opened up an entirely new scientific set of questions, and the right next step is to go solve those really fundamental and basic science questions. So once those are successfully solved, we can come back to actually building out the end solution we're trying to get to. Okay. Sometimes, though, teaming up with folks, and we've done this where we've got projects, we've solved a key problem, let's say in superconductivity and superconducting materials, and the right next step is there's someone like the Army Research Labs might have a problem they're trying to solve, and it's at a higher level of TRL. So work together with them to make introductions and wind up finding where there's resources there, transitioning it across, transitioning to different DOE offices, what are called the applied offices. Let's say the energy storage office, or in the office of electricity, the hydrogen and fuel cell office, the vehicle technologies offices, solar, the wind program. So we're constantly working with those groups to try and making sure we've got good handoffs. And also there's the whole question of what's the science around your pilot plant? Do you need to actually study some questions that are necessary to be solved before you can go into manufacturing? And only then, once you've said, yes, you're ready, then you go to the business model. That's when you actually say, hey, I want to build a business out of this. And you wind up taking that value proposition, and based on the business conditions at that time, you decide what do you want to do. The wrong way to do this is in stage one to say, I'm going to do a license, or I'm going to do a spin-out company, and here's my business plan. Because at the end of 3 years, the world will have changed. The right way to do this is an iterative process where you're constantly working with potential users of the technology, vetting that value proposition, and only at the end do you wind up translating that into a business. So, what is the foundation of building that pathway? Well, value proposition at the bottom is the foundation for everything you wind up then doing in building that path to market. On top of that, you overlay what's your business model. You know, you may be in an existing company, and you need to wind up in that business model strategically convincing the right stakeholders to make an investment internally to building a new product out. Or you might use it to build a partnership with another company. Or you might do a spin-out. There's a number of ways of accomplishing that. Only then do you wind up putting together your strategic plan that says, this is how much capital, this is how much capabilities you wind up needing. That's when you think about things like, do I need a strategic investment or venture capital? Do I license it? Do I sell it? And at the end of the day, you wind up focusing on execution. As a friend of mine likes to say, you know, happiness is positive cash flow. So you wind up building that virtuous cycle, but that's based on people that are doing that execution. Right? So that's how you wind up building that up subsequent to ARPA-E funding. So a few comments on this pathway is starting out by writing a business plan or writing a business model, thinking you've got to hire someone that's all you need to do for ARPA-E is write the right business plan. That's not even asking the right question. You need to develop that foundational information at the start. Obviously, you need to plan for success, or you should plan to fail. So a few questions we run into. If you're with a university, they say, we do a licensing model. We don't need to build this value proposition. You ask your licensing person in that case, what was your most recent license, and why did you license it for that amount? Typically, it's not based on a whole lot of analysis. It is people able to come to a deal at a certain price, and it uses the exact same structures they've used over and over and over again for licensing, right? So if you wind up vetting that value, the value proposition well, you could potentially find where there's actually increased opportunities that your organization is leaving money on the table, even in a licensing model. Or you might find a new set of partners that are the most important partners. The VC model. If you're a researcher and you're going to go raise venture capital money, and you think you're going to use that for additional research expenditures, just realize there's a huge return on invested capital expectation from the investment of VC money. It's on the order of 40% a year. So unless you're able to actually solve relevant problems, typically venture capitalists don't fund research. They fund productization and developing markets and teams, right? So it's the later stage stuff. In a corporate model, one thing you should ask yourself is, how does this overall opportunity align with your overall company? You don't want to suddenly have your company decide to diversify and go in a completely different direction halfway through your project, right? And that winds up happening for reasons that are completely unrelated to what the researcher does in their day-to-day execution of their job. And then a couple of things is, what's, for the people that are leading this, what's their full-time job? And if you want to lead the project, why will talented people follow you? Now, one thing in this conversation I'm not doing is talking about intellectual property at all. That is a much longer discussion, and leave that to other people. But it's necessary, it's just not a sufficient ingredient. So what are some common next steps from an ARPA-E project? Well, quoting Eric Toon, it's at the end of a project, we know it works, we may just not know if it scales, right? So a next step clearly is in areas of scaling. How do you wind up going from a small batch process to a continuous process? How do you do that at high yield, high throughput? How do you measure these things? These are all scientific challenges. There's a huge value that's emerging looking at the value of building a pilot plant. Having that pilot plant near where your researchers are. So you're not making a huge jump from a sort of kilowatt or kilowatt hour scale to hundreds of megawatt hour scale without understanding what's the challenge in between. And then also there's a value in looking at your supply chains, especially in electrochemistry. A lot of things are done with trade secret, and you can wind up building a business model. It's a very successful business model where you might make the key ingredients, and then you wind up partnering with other people that wind up putting that in their product. So it's important to say, how do you wind up making that secret sauce competitively? One last thing I want to talk about is, one of the outcomes and goals for ARPA-E is, of course, we're having taxpayers making this investment. They'd like to see that return by growth in the economy. And it's really exciting to watch, and over the last few years, there's really been, a resurgence in manufacturing things in the U.S. And I'd really, highly recommend people. BCG, Boston Consulting Group, just came out with this report last month. It's online, looking at what's the drivers behind American export surge right now. And it's things like, on a productivity-adjusted skilled labor basis, the U.S. is actually a fairly low-cost competitor, right? We've got historically very low energy costs. Oddly, because we import so many things, exporting has low shipping costs because you can put things into the backhaul shipments that's going offshore. The other thing to look at is coming out of the MIT Production and Innovation Economy Group is how there's real importance, if you want to scale things, in connecting that research really, really closely to your pilot manufacturing. Because then you actually wind up discovering what some of the problems you have in pilot manufacturing and build this virtuous feedback loop that winds up ultimately giving competitive advantage in technology and finding out things you didn't even know you needed to know. So with that, that I believe is about the end of what I had prepared today. Thank you all. Sorry we went long, but now it's time to go change what's possible. With that, Casey, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, that was great. I think it's really interesting to hear you call out the pieces of this that are foundational in the early years. And we'd like to open it up to questions. So if you have a question, again, if you can enter it into the Q&A box and click all participants, send it to all participants, because that's the only way that we're going to be able to view your question. So I think I'll kick it off by asking a question around the techno-economic modeling. Here at ARPA-E, you know, a lot because of your feedback and also because of others' feedback, we've moved, we've kind of shifted having our teams, when they do the techno-economic analysis, we've asked them to do it a lot earlier now in the research process than previously. And it'd just be interesting to have you comment on why this is important, and also some examples of where you've seen this affect an outcome.
Yeah, so when ARPA-E was first standing up, we had a nascent commercialization team, and we didn't have as formalized of a tech-to-market team working on these projects. And so we were putting in the milestones to say every quarter we wanted to have a commercialization update, essentially. And in the GRIDS program, in the first quarter, the feedback we said is do this first order techno-economic modeling. I would say it's purely anecdotal, but having one or two of the teams come back and go, gee, we suddenly realized we don't know this one aspect of this technology. It's really important. You know, so we had a flow battery technology where someone said, you know, we really know well about this one reaction chemistry. We don't know anything, and we didn't have any things in our plan to look at this other rate limiting step, and we'd like to wind up looking at it. And actually, it got down to the point where they wound up bringing new people to the team as a result of it, and it influenced it. And just seeing that in practice, you know, ARPA-E is flexible enough that we wound up learning and teaching ourselves a little bit from that. Also had another project where someone came in that in their proposal, it really was driven a lot by that cost model. They had identified, you know, a specific technical innovation that if they didn't solve that, everything else wasn't going to work on a cost basis. And so really wanted to focus in on that area. And just seeing a couple of projects where that matters that way is important. I can envision, especially as a systems level kind of frameworks for a lot of the innovation, you know, if you may be focusing your research on a very detailed materials innovation or a chemical innovation or a biological innovation early stage in your project, but you almost always embed that in a systems level framework that's relevant and links you back up to the energy problem you're solving. And I think that's just what we end up learning, is not only in the projects I have, but other projects.
And we just had a really good question come in from Ursula. She asked, when you mean publish to fail, do you mean publish a scientific experiment that didn't work? And what are other ways that you can get the information out there besides a scientific paper?
Well, actually, so this woman named Rebecca Henderson, she taught at Sloan, and I think she teaches at Harvard Business School now, that studied what's the impact of DARPA over the years. Not ARPA-E, but DARPA over, you know, their 30, 40-year history. And what were the things that they uniquely contributed? And one of the things she highlighted, she's come in and visited with us a couple times. One thing she highlighted is the willingness to publish failed experiments. Now, you know, you're not going to get a cover of Nature by saying a failed experiment. It's obviously challenging to publish it that way. What people wind up publishing is saying, we've got this problem, and you frame it in a projective way going forward, but getting it into the scientific literature is really, really useful. And it says, hey, we think we can solve XYZ problem. I can think of a couple on the top of my head, but I really don't want to go down that pathway here. But you know, we've got a couple of problems that we can wind up solving. We've invented one half of it. It will never work unless this other secondary innovation happens. And so the publication really is about the need for that secondary innovation, not the primary innovation. So I think that's kind of the way to think about that. You know, there's probably in the long run, let me say this is ARPA-E. In the long run, our technical reports, after even we have limited data rights data, which gives a period of time where the performers can secure intellectual property and wind up, getting that secured and start moving towards the marketplace with it, which is what we want to see, that translational activity happen. Ultimately, it all winds up in the public domain. So after a 5-year period, it winds up going into the public domain. So ultimately, things wind up out there. I think one of the key things for publishing negative results, though, frame it in a way that's a positive discussion of it, is to make sure that as things are funded, there's a lot of ideas that seem kind of science fiction-y. We want to make sure that we're identifying what the real technical challenges are as we go along, so that other sources of funding, or even successors to ourselves in 5 years, don't fund the same idea going down the same path with the same pitfalls. But actually, this is the whole idea of publication: is we wind up sharing as community, we stand on each other's shoulders, and we move forward.
Yeah, so I think feeding off that around, university professors and labs, we often get this question posed to us by the PIs that are more academic-y, who say, my real career goal here isn't to form a startup or, to take this out and build a company out of it. I want to stay where I am. I like my university position, and so I'm just going to license this out. And if I'm just going to license this out, what's the real point in me doing all this in-depth market research and techno-economic modeling? So I'll pose that to you, since I get that question a lot.
So my favorite case study on this, and I completely understand the goal. I would challenge that whatever faculty members who ask you that question to say, have you run this by your graduate students? Because my favorite example of this is Cree University down in North Carolina, or Cree Inc. down at North Carolina. It spun out of NC State in the late 1980s. The faculty member whose lab that came out of is a very successful National Academy member, Bob Davis. He has had 3 or 4 companies spin out of his lab before, and is a great mentor to people who are moving forward with the technology. All those companies subsequently become his research partners. He really, and I hope Bob's not listening in, but without saying a lot, he really is a wonderful person mentoring entrepreneurs, and has done a great job essentially effectively becoming one of the hotbeds for historically developing wide bandgap semiconductors coming out of there. And the researchers that wound up founding Cree were 5 of his graduate students. Mm-hmm. So in that case, what wound up happening is you wound up, the challenge in that case is having the faculty member learning to saying, okay, how do I empower my graduate students? It's their job to build a business out of this. It's not my job to solve that for them. The way, and it's just an evolution of the relationship you have with your students in that case.
And I think
so there's a lot of great models on that.
Yeah, something you mentioned during your talk too was that you do the techno-economic modeling so that you can really understand the value of what you have. So when you do go to negotiate that license, you're in a better position.
Yeah. I mean, tech transfer offices, typically also the university, tech transfer offices are sort of a resource-limited office. They respond to places where they think they can wind up getting money out of it, right? And so if you can walk in with a set of partners already and an economic justification for why you all should license it, they'll wind up giving you attention in terms of filing more patents and all that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm. So I think I'll shift to kind of a more broader question here, and something that we talk about a lot around ARPA-E, and I know our director, Cheryl Martin, often mentions this, is that our mission isn't just about funding individual technologies, but changing the way that communities think about what's possible to achieve in this space. And one of the best examples of that I can think of is, your grids program, when you put out that $100 per kilowatt hour target, the community, there was pushback from that, talk about, this might not be possible, this is so far out there. And, you put that out about 2.5 years ago or something like that. How has the community changed since then? How has setting that really audacious goal affected how people think about that space?
So where that wound up playing out in the first order was actually in the proposals and the selection process, was to say people that wound up taking the challenge on it, because what we're trying to do is we're doing that transformational technology idea, and if we go down a known evolutionary pathway, say, everybody in the world thinks that XYZ point, I'm not going to put a number out there, $200 a kilowatt hour is all that's needed, you're just going to get a little bit more incrementalism, and you're going to get more money, and you're not going to get new thinking in the areas. So if you look at the portfolio, we wound up supporting, especially in things like some of the electrochemistry areas and groups where they weren't already receiving funding to look at grid scale storage, and they weren't thinking about it. What we found is there are 2 or 3 pathways. You look at things like the manganese dioxide, making a rechargeable zinc manganese dioxide battery, or some of the metal air batteries where you've got really significant scientific challenges, but it's much more earth-abundant, ubiquitous materials that if you overcome those scientific challenges, you now have a pathway to that a very credible pathway to $100 a kilowatt hour. Or you look at the liquid metal battery approach, or completely rethinking how you manufacture a battery.
I thought it was interesting how you set that $100 per kilowatt hour goal. What was your thinking around how you set that goal?
Yeah, so it was, as we went through earlier here, if you wind up with 2.5 cents a kilowatt hour, it's very simple first order calculation. If you take the capital cost, divide it by the number of cycles and the round trip efficiency, you wind up with the cents per kilowatt hour of how much it costs to store that electricity, not the electricity itself, but just what it costs to store the electricity. And that comes out to about 2.5 cents a kilowatt hour. That corresponds about to the difference between wholesale and retail price for electricity on average, which says if you're going to wind up storing something, essentially you're becoming a warehouse. So what does it cost to be a warehouse?
So you set the goal based on where you need to get to so that it would matter in the market.
Yeah, exactly. It was looking at what's the challenge for the electric grid. It's a very, very difficult technical challenge to get to. But if we wind up solving it, this is one of those technologies, the holy grail technology for the power grid or for the energy sector. So very exciting to see people stepping up to that challenge.
So I have one last question to kind of wrap it up, and sort of a finale question for Mark. In 20 years from now, 20 years into the future, and you're looking back at your time at ARPA-E, what do you hope that you'll be most proud about?
Wow. So that's a great question, Casey. Thanks. I hope I don't get too philosophical here. One is, did we actually start an organization that is doing a great job and having an impact out there? And that's going to be a really important thing we'll wind up seeing, and not just surviving, but just striving towards excellence. And I'm really proud of this group of people that I've had a chance to work with the last couple of years. The other thing is looking at the specific technologies. I would love to be in a point where you actually see it deployed in just everyday life. And people don't think about it, but you look at it and you say, inside of that technology is something that, you helped provide some guidance for a period of time. I heard R.T. Prabhakar over at DARPA talk about this at the summit last year, when she was coming back to DARPA, and she was getting briefed by a number of people in the field that were, in the military, some soldiers, and they were describing a piece of equipment that they took into the field. And they said, it's a little heavy, but it's really, really valuable piece of equipment. What we do is we leave a little water behind, and we leave a little food behind, and we're just fine. We'd rather take this out there, and it's going to be important. And then she realized that piece of equipment, 25 years ago, when she was a program director herself, that piece of equipment was something that had technology that she started as a program embedded in it. So, as she said,
very eloquently, you know, a Marine would rather take her technology into the field than food or water. That says a lot. And if we're lucky enough to have that kind of a moment, that would be great.
Great. Well, I think we're at time now, so I just want to say thank you to everyone for joining us, and thank you to Mark for taking the time to share what you've learned out of this crazy ARPA-E experience.
Thank you all.
Okay.